Cade McNamara can lead Iowa to the college football playoff. But what's it going to take? We break it down today. Locked On Hawkeye.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts, and you can also watch us on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. If you're on the podcast side of things, 5-star reviews. Today's episode of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, we kick off our previews of the position groups for the Iowa football team with the most important position in sports, and it is, of course, the quarterback position. Iowa, a place where many people believe quarterbacks go to die, and though it's not exactly fair, that is certainly the perception for many people out there. We look back at what really these last 4 years have been, huge disappointments and frustrations, some of the worst quarterback play maybe ever seen in recent history of college football at the power structure level with what we saw a year ago after the injury to Cade McNamara. But we start the conversation today with Iowa's incumbent starting quarterback, Cade McNamara. And when he made his decision a year ago, December, that he was going to transfer from Michigan to the University of Iowa, the excitement was huge. Going after the last couple of seasons of Spencer Petras and the frustrations that have built of seeing him and some of just the incompetent play that we saw out of Petras, everybody was ready for a change. And as people were ready for a change, there was talk of some of the young guys of potentially going there. If they were going to get a transfer quarterback, it was going to be somebody likely down the line, somebody that certainly did not have the resume of a Cade McNamara. Now, when we talk about McNamara, we have to go a couple of different directions. And first of all, when you look at his apex, 2021, he leads Michigan to the Big Ten title, their first since 2004, 17-year drought at Michigan without a Big Ten championship, which is just absolutely baffling in its own right. That season, he completed 64% of his passes, just over 2,500 yards that year, averaged 7.9 yards per attempt. That's a key number we'll get into a little bit later. Now, you look at the touchdown to interception ratio, doesn't wow you. 15 touchdowns against 6 interceptions, a QB rating of 141.9. The statistical profile doesn't tell you everything, though. It does tell you some. To have the belief that Cade McNamara is going to be a guy, regardless of system, that's going to throw for 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns is just not realistic. That's not the kind of quarterback that he is, and certainly is not going to happen in the system that Iowa has in place, even if we anticipate improvements with Tim Lester taking over for Brian Ferentz. You think you're going to see a step forward. I think we all do. However, that is not the way that they're going to be built. That's not going to be the way that they play. So we're looking at some baseline numbers. We're looking for numbers that make sense, that are realistic goals for Cade McNamara this year. Before we get into those goals, health. That's number one. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the other guys. Marco Lainez back for another season after we got to see him in a bowl game a year ago. We'll also talk a little bit about the other big transfer coming in and Brendan Sullivan and what he's going to add to the equation. We'll get into all of that. But this is McNamara's job. I think we have to start and be very frank about that. Cade McNamara will win this starting job. He is healthy. He's back to 100%. The assurances are there that he is going to be the guy. This is his job. Now, it'll be great to have somebody in camp that can push him, and that's Brendan Sullivan, who adds a different element to the game. If you believe that Cade McNamara is going to be a guy that's going to be running around making plays, that's also not what it is. Just 2 touchdowns in his career on the ground. His big year, as we mentioned, 2021, 37 carries for 26 yards and a touchdown. He can tuck it. He can do things like that, but we're not talking about a guy, and certainly coming off of 2 pretty significant injuries that ended his last 2 seasons, we're not looking at this guy being a big-time runner. Now, can he be more mobile than Spencer Petras? Yes. More mobile than what we saw last year from Deacon Hill? God, I hope so. If not, we're going to be in big trouble. That's what you're looking at with Cade McNamara. So I mentioned those numbers, and we look back. So any of those numbers would be improvement from what we saw out of Spencer Petras. Petras' first season as a starter, 57% completion percentage, 6.4 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. 2021, about the same, really across the board. Yards per attempt, basically the same. Completion percentage, basically the same. 10 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. And then his final season in 2022, starts 12 games, completes 55.9% of his passes, 5 touchdowns in 12 games, and 5 interceptions. He wasn't good. And we saw the confidence just dissipate out of him. You saw him questioning his reads, questioning what he saw. That's not what we're shooting for. Let's go back to the quarterback before him, though. And let's look at Nate Stanley. Now, Nate Stanley probably left a little bit to be desired. You know, in the big moments, the big plays, you think of the plays that he kind of left on the field. I think that's a component that a lot of people, their memories are. We have the great one, the Ohio State game, 55-24 beat down, the woodshedding of the Buckeyes in Kinnick Stadium. Got a defender draped on his ankle as he fires a dart into the end zone. There are high water moments, but there are also big moments that he just couldn't quite get over the hump. I still believe that at least one, if not both, 2 of those 3 teams that he started for should have been in the Big Ten championship game. Alas, it did not happen for Nate Stanley. But his sophomore year, threw 26 touchdowns against 6 interceptions. That's right. Yes, an Iowa quarterback threw 26 touchdowns. Then followed it up with another 26 touchdown season. And then his final year, he was 16 touchdowns against 7 interceptions in 2019. 2,400, 2,800, 2,900 yards in each of those 3 seasons. Now, another one of the knocks against Nate Stanley was the completion percentage. His best year was 59.4%. So with Cade McNamara, one of his greatest skills is his accuracy. And you look back at that good season at Michigan when he completed a big percentage, when he's completing 64.2% of his passes. That's what we're striving for. If we can get that number north of 60, something that just hasn't happened for Iowa in the Kirk Ferentz era, if we can get that number up to that kind of level, I think we're starting to cook now. That's what we're looking at. But it can't be completing 65% of your passes, but your yards per attempt is at 5.5. That means a lot of dink and dunk stuff, dropping it down, a lot of bubble screens, tunnel screens, and the like. Now, that's not what we're looking for. You still got to be able to press the ball down the field, and yards per attempt go hand in hand many times with that statistic. That's what we're looking for Cade McNamara. I think he can do it. I believe in the guy. And talking to people involved in Iowa football, the team believes in the guy. He carries himself with a sense of confidence. Some might say a sense of arrogance. Whatever you want to term it, he has leadership qualities that you're looking for. We go back to a spring a year ago in 2023 after he arrived on campus and taking a group of guys with him out to California and going through and working through a bunch of different things and just hanging out and having a good time. And the leader that you want for Iowa football. Spencer Petras tried. He just wasn't able to follow it up on the field. Nate Stanley didn't have that kind of dynamic personality. Cade McNamara has that, and he's a guy that can get people to follow. And Iowa needs this. With the question marks that remain at the wide receiver position, with the question marks that they still have up front, even with all those returning starters, they need a guy that they believe in. They have a guy that they are going to go to battle with on the football field. And that's what you have with Cade McNamara. Those leadership qualities go hand in hand. So what should be our baseline? What should be the numbers that we're looking at? If Iowa is going to make a run this year, Iowa's going to be a 10-win team again this season, get into the conversation for the college football playoff. What are the numbers that we need to be looking for? We'll talk about that. Plus, who is pushing Cade McNamara as we get ready for August football camp? Stay right there. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Trent Condon back with you once again here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. We're talking quarterback play today, and what are the numbers we're shooting for? Sight unseen, not knowing what this new offensive system is going to look like, but looking the way that Iowa plays. And you kind of take a look back at last season in college football, and I was going through and just taking a look at some numbers of middle of the pack quarterback numbers, because I think that is kind of the highest baseline we can be looking for this season for Cade McNamara. He's not going to throw for 4,000 yards, as mentioned earlier. We talked about yards per attempt and the importance of that number, pushing that number north of 7 yards per attempt. Well, if he averages just north of that, 7.1, that would be 64th in the country a year ago. You do something like that. So here's a guy that I think would make a whole lot of sense. Donovan Smith, he was a quarterback last year at Houston. In fact, he'll be back at Houston this season. Threw for 2,800 yards last year, 7.1 yards per attempt. He also threw 22 touchdowns against 13 interceptions. Now, you want that interception number, obviously, to be a little bit lower, but I think that's a good number. Completion percentage at 64.5%. If you hit those numbers with a running game that I believe Iowa's going to have, I don't believe that they completely unlocked everything that they're trying to do in the run game a year ago, but it was a huge improvement from what we saw in 2022. The step forward that we made. LaShawn Williams making big plays. We know Caleb Johnson and what he can do. We saw it 2 years ago as a freshman. The combination of size, speed, power. He has everything that you're looking for. He's like eBay Motors out there. I mean, you have those things with Caleb Johnson and the depth that they have at the running back position. We feel like the improvements are there. They showed with the offensive line improvements in the run game. It comes down to the passing game. And you might be saying to yourself, well, what's going to happen at wide receiver? And I think it's a fair question. We await the decision of what's going to be handed down for Caleb Brown. Is he going to be facing a one-game suspension? And on its own, on the surface, not a big deal. Illinois State, if you can't beat Illinois State without Caleb Brown, this Iowa football team is going to be in big, big trouble. However, first time on the field, new system, doing it against another opponent, and Iowa State waiting in the wings, who returns 20 starters from a year ago, one of the most productive teams, if not the most productive team in returns from a year ago in all of college football, and that's waiting for you in week number 2. You have to be ready to go. You have to hit the ground running, and if you're without Caleb Johnson right away. We need to see more out of Seth Anderson. And, a guy that went out right away last season, second place from scrimmage, goes out there, has the touchdown to open things up in the opener a year ago, and it felt like we were off and running. Now, we found out very quickly that was not exactly the case with this Iowa offense. However, I got it done there on that first play. He was in and out of the lineup. We'll see if they're going to find some gadget plays. Can one of the young receivers step up? And we'll talk about that more as we break down the wide receiver position. But are the weapons there for Cade McNamara to have the kind of season that I mentioned? 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, 64% completion percentage. Are the weapons there? Wide receiver doesn't wow you, but tight end does. We know what we have Luke Lachey. We know Addison Estrenga. That's your number 2. That would be a starter for probably 100 teams in college football. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I state that. There's 134 teams in college football at the FBS level, and I believe that Addison Estrenga would be a starter for 100 of them. That's where we're talking about, and that's your backup. Plus the depth that they have, a lot of weapons that they're going to be able to go at that position. And what we've heard from Tim Lester and what he's looking to do, look, he's not completely splitting the atom here. He's not doing something that is so revolutionary that everybody in the country is going to be talking about it. He's catching this offense up to the 21st century. Those are the numbers that we're looking for Cade McNamara. And if he can deliver those types of numbers, I very well believe that this is going to be good enough to have this team in contention. Now, is he going to be good enough to beat Ohio State on the road at the Horseshoe? Probably not. Is this team good enough and maybe deep enough? And that's another one of my concerns with this team. I love what they have, the starting 22. I really do. Or at least maybe 20 of the 22. That aside, the depth, that remains a question for me for Iowa football. You return a ton of starters. You feel great about that. But because we haven't seen a lot of these younger guys, we just don't know. Developmentally, we know that normally Iowa football is in good shape. When you have something like this, these guys continue to develop and take a step forward. That is my concern, though, overall for this team to make the kind of run that we're talking about. But he is not alone at the quarterback position. No, there is a whole lot more, including the newest transfer and Brendan Sullivan. So Brendan Sullivan comes in from Northwestern, and at Northwestern, he was a part-time starter. We saw him a little bit throughout his career at Northwestern, including against the Hawkeyes. So you look at his numbers and you look at his statistics all time. 2023, last season, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, completed 63.6% of his passes. You like that. And 7.2 yards per attempt. Those are good numbers. If you saw him last year in Wrigley, look, he was competent. They got to him a lot. 5 sacks in the game by Iowa. And that was really the biggest thing. You can blame it on the offensive line of Northwestern. He was sacked last year. He played 5 games a year ago. And in those 5 games, he was sacked 23 times. 2 ways to look at it. Is it because he holds on to the ball too long? Because he's running around trying to make plays back there, and because of that, ultimately, the defense is going to get to him? I think there's a component to that, and I think those are fair criticisms of the play of Brendan Sullivan. But you just go through, and you look, and he had a big game against Howard. All right, we're going to cross that one off. Against Nebraska, he was okay. Remember, that was a really good Nebraska defense a year ago. He was sacked 7 times in that game. Still went 12-23 for 176 yards, no touchdowns and an interception. Against Maryland, a huge game, 265 yards passing, nearly 70% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions in that one. And then the Iowa game, as we mentioned, that's what we saw from Sullivan. From what I've heard, he is still developmentally a running quarterback. A guy, yes, that can make throws. He can do those things. But because of the size and the physicality that it plays with at 6'3", 225, and just having somebody competent as your backup quarterback, somebody that is not going to take a back seat when they're going through drills to Cade McNamara. He's not going to be a guy that's going to back down. You talk about leadership. You hear that a lot. He's a tough and rumble kind of guy. I mean, he's a guy that's probably hanging out with the offensive line all the time, not because you're supposed to, because you're a quarterback, because he's that kind of dude. He's tatted up. He's ready to go. He plays with the physicality that we normally don't see out of a quarterback. Certainly, maybe going back to C.J. Beathard. I mean, is that the last time? Nate Stanley was a big dude, but it was pretty rare outside of the aforementioned play against Ohio State where his physicality was something that came through. You'll see that with Brendan Sullivan. I don't believe that he is going to be a realistic option to be the starter. As I said earlier, I think Cade McNamara as a guy, but having somebody like this, somebody that has played in the Big Ten, somebody that has gone out there, gone through the wars, I really believe that this is going to be an opportunity to have huge, huge improvements at the quarterback position. And then we go next to the youngster. And coming in this season, after what we saw from Marco Lainez, I was shocked last year as Deacon Hill continued to trot out there and be the worst quarterback that I've seen in my 44 years of living, that they just kept doing it. Why can't you give a rep to Marco Lainez? They didn't. And until the bowl game, when it became untenable and they're getting blown out, they finally pushed that button and finally went that direction. Another big guy, 6'2", 228. You saw what he did with his legs in the bowl game. You also saw, much like we talked about with Brendan Sullivan, a guy that is lacking some of the fundamental things as a throwing quarterback to play at the level and certainly play in the system that I was looking for. I'm not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater here and say Marco Lainez is a completely lost cause. I want to see the coaching that is given to him right now by Tim Lester and what he is learning. And if you can smooth out some of those rough edges with Lainez, I think there's something there. I think potentially he can be a starting quarterback at Iowa, just not in the here and now, and likely not in the next 2 years. And at the quarterback position, to anticipate a guy's going to stick around until his redshirt junior season to vie for a starting position, it's not very realistic. But that's where we are. They also brought in another transfer quarterback from Colorado State as they brought in the Buddenmeyer connection, Jackson Slatton. 6'4", 193. Numbers not real pretty. It's an arm. It's another guy that can go through reps. Another guy working in that third and fourth team. It's fine. Take a guy like that. Absolutely. No problem. That is, I think, a good pickup and one that makes a whole lot of sense. And then finally, the incoming freshman, James Resar. Comes in from Jacksonville, Florida. When you talk about James Resar, you talk about speed. One of the fastest guys that Iowa's had at the quarterback position, at least if you look at his track numbers at the high school level. Talking, though, to people in the recruiting space, they still have major concerns about him as a thrower, if he's going to be able to translate at the high-level power conference level of football. You got an athlete there. 6'4", 212. We'll see. Is he destined for a position change down the line? That is a question. Quarterbacks, we don't see that much anymore. You're going to find a spot to play, and that's normally what you see. We'll see on this one. I'm in the holding pattern, and we'll get our first glimpse of him coming up at Kids Day coming up in August. That is the quarterback position for the Iowa Hawkeyes in our first run through here the position groups as we get ready for the Iowa football season. Well, it is here. The EA Sports College football game is out. Some ratings there. Talked to a few people that have been able to play it. We'll talk about that a little bit. I am not excited to. However, work duties got in the way last night. We'll try to change that. We'll talk a little bit about the game, the ratings, and some of the things we're hearing about the newest college football game. That's as we continue on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Back with you once again here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Let's jump into it. The new college football EA Sports game has finally been released, at least the version for people that pre-ordered, and the 19th is the official date for those that weren't able to nab it that way. Talked to a couple of guys here at work today that have already played the game, said it's immaculate. It's incredible. And as we've been without this game now for 11 years. Think of something that you love that goes away for 11 years. My radio partner, Ken Miller, he's Canadian. He's from Winnipeg. His Jets left. They left, became the Coyotes, and he was without a team until they brought them back as an expansion team. His Winnipeg Jets. I mean, that stings, right? Well, maybe a little bit different here, but I know there's so many people out here. And this is something that I'm excited to see kind of reunite people. So, as everydayers know, I got a couple of youngsters. Got a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old at home. Video games have not been anything that has jumped up, though they play games on their iPads. That's something that they get into. My son Jack, who's 4, he really likes a couple of games. And I'm wondering if this is something that can come together. Now, if I play Jack the first time, I'm not laying off. I mean, I'm going to run it up and I'm going to win 104-0. I mean, we're going to put the hurting on the young man right away. However, if this is something that can unite, but not just young kids like mine, but just generations. You have me, guy in his mid-40s, grew up playing this game. I mean, I go all the way back to Bill Walsh football and going back to College Football USA, which was, I think, one of the initial ones before it morphed into college football and then the year behind it. I've been playing this game for a long time. I took the Iowa Hawkeyes and one of my buddy's brothers who was on the Iowa football team, Aaron Granquist, and I went to win the Heisman. Now, he was a fullback. I moved him to halfback, and I'm sorry, Cedric Shaw and Tavian Banks. You guys were out, and I got Aaron Granquist in there running at 3 yards a pop and trying to find a way to get to 1,000 yards and win a college football championship. That's the things that you do. And building teams up and being the GM, being an athletic director, doing all the things, the recruiting. And now we got the NIL elements, and that's a component that I'm excited to see how this works too. But being without it for 11 years, being without it for this long, and it's now back. Disappointed. Work got in the way. I would love to see, obviously, it be a whole lot better. So Iowa as a team is ranked 87th overall. The defense, 88. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think that's incredibly low. The offense is 76. That's probably fair. Quarterback, the listed starter is Cade McNamara. He is a 77 grade overall. Brendan Sullivan is a 76, and Lainez is a 71. Your running backs, LaShawn Williams is the top running back at an 80. Kamari Moulton, a 73. Jazz Patterson, 72. Terrell Washington Jr., also a 72. Caleb Johnson, not in the game, but there is a Iowa player on the roster rated a 74. So second behind LaShawn Williams. They call him Eric Irvin. We'll see. Can you edit names? I hope you can edit names. If you can edit names, what we'll be doing. I might be pumping Caleb Johnson up just a little bit in my ratings. All right, fullback, you got Hayden Large in there. He's a 75. Here's wide receiver. Caleb Brown's a 75. Jacob Gill is the 73 ahead of Seth Anderson, a 70. Jared Bowie at 67. And how wild is this? This is so Iowa football. Again, only 85 players are listed on these rosters. They only have 4 wide receivers. However, they have 6 tight ends. Iowa, right? Luke Lachey, one of the top offensive players, the top offensive player for Iowa with an 88. Addison Estrenga to 82. Gavin Hoffman also out there. Ortworth Van Vogt. That is what you have. Offensive line in the middle. Logan Jones is an 86. Connor Colby is your top rated player on the offensive line as an 88. Mason Richmond, just a 79. Let's hope he plays better than a 79 this season. And Jennings Dunker is an 81. And then you get defensively, Ethan Herkett is an 81. Deontay Craig at a 79. That's a joke. Come on. Deontay Craig's a lot higher than a 79. He is going to show it this season. I believe in Deontay Craig. Defensive tackle, Aaron Graves and Y.A. Black. Graves an 83, Black an 80. I think that's low on him. He's going to have, I think, a big season this year. The linebackers are studs, as we know. Jay Higgins a 94, Nick Jackson is a 90, and we wrap it up with the defensive back. Sebastian Castro listed as a free safety. He's a 92, Quinn Schulte an 89. Strong safety, Xavier Wampa a 90. Your cornerbacks, Jamari Harris an 84, Deshaun Lee an 80, TJ Hall a 78. John Nestor, they got him too low as they have him at a 74. And then special teams, Drew Stevens a 74. Boy, it's going to be a big bounce back season for Drew Stevens. They need him this year and not see the guy that we saw the last couple of times and didn't even get the opportunity against Nebraska, then didn't get to even attempt a field goal or an extra point in the final 2 games of the year. And Reese Dakin, the incoming Aussie punter, is ranked 69. That's what we have in your rankings for college football. Hope you guys are enjoying it in the EA Sports game. I'm excited for it. Can't wait to get there, get a little bit of time. Maybe tonight we'll be able to polish off the PS5, fire things up, and get ready for it. The wave is a part of the game. I thought that was incredibly cool to see that. Some people are upset, though, that you can't just hit the X button and move past it after you've seen it a couple of times. I get that, too. And apparently you can't. However, get a dynasty started, have a couple of things going. And with my full-time gig, radio, KXNO, here in Des Moines and on the iHeartMedia app, we're talking about potentially doing something fun maybe for some people out there. And we'll make sure to pass it along to you out there as well. There it is. College football 25 is upon us, and the 2024 football season also right around the corner. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every single day. Hey, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN all day on your TV? Do you have to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Well, it's time to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We will continue our position group breakdown. We also have some recruiting coming up later in the week. Brian from Locked On is going to stop by, our recruiting analyst, and we will talk about the next targets for Iowa football. Class shaping up incredibly well for 2025. What's still out there for Iowa? We'll talk about that later in the week. We'll continue to break things down. Got a little basketball talk. No, there was a media availability for the women's basketball team. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And it is August 9th. That will be Media Day coming up on Friday, August 9th over in Iowa City. Excited for that one. And we'll have some content coming your way here on Locked On. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.